everyone, and welcome to the Marshall and Stevens 2026 Energy Forum. Let's jump right into it. I'll go ahead and hand off to our moderator today, John Garrity. John, over to you.
Welcome, everybody, to Marshall and Stevens 2026 Energy Forum. Thanks for joining us. My name is John Garrity, and I'm the National Practice Leader for Marshall and Stevens Energy and Infrastructure Group. I'm really excited to be the moderator for this forum, and I think we've really put together a great panel. Energy in 2026 is neither abundant at the times we need it most, nor is it low cost. It is constrained strategic infrastructure. The key questions now are whether power is reliable, financeable, and dispatchable at the speed required by today's economy, especially in light of the rise in AI and data centers. Today's panel brings together perspectives across project development, market trends, and law to explore how energy is being repriced, restructured, and reallocated in response to these forces. Well, now it's time to introduce our panelists. But before we dive in, just one quick update. Unfortunately, Yumna Chemna of Global Infrastructure Partners, GIP, couldn't be with us today due to a last-minute change in her international travel plans. We'll definitely miss her, but we have an outstanding group here, and I'm genuinely excited to kick this conversation off. So let's get started. We'll introduce our panel. Bobby, can we start with you? And then if you would please introduce yourself and follow that up with Brent, Ken, and then Fahad.
Sure. Thanks for having us today. It looks like it's going to be a very interesting conversation. I'm Bobby Majemder. I'm a senior partner with FBT Gibbons. We're a national law firm where I am the co-head of the energy practice group.
And I'm Brent Nelson. I lead the long-term forecasting team at Ascend Analytics, which is a software and consulting shop that focuses on financial decision-making in the power sector.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ken Malik. I am the head of development with Grupo Cobra Zero E. We are an IPP based out of Madrid, Spain, under the Vinci Group.
Hi, I'm Fahad. I'm Director of Structured Finance at Total Energies. We are a global oil and gas and energy major, and one of the big developers here in the US.
Great. I very much appreciate all you guys joining us today. Thank you all. We've structured today's discussion around 4 core themes shaping the energy landscape right now. We've also incorporated a number of questions we received from the audience in advance, so we will going to do our best to weave those into the conversation throughout the forum. Let's start with what we're referring to as the reliability first reset. Over the past several years, the resources comprising the annual new generation added to our power grid has been dominated by new solar and wind installs. Our first topic goes to whether the need for a greater capacity of instantaneous power to support an impressive forecast of new data center installations will cause a reset in the mix of new annual installs toward fully dispatchable resources. I'd like to lead off our conversation with a question for you, Brent. Follow-up thoughts on this by other panels are very much welcome. Brent, as you develop your projections of electric power supply and demand curves, let's say trend lines for the next 7 years or so, how well do you think additional solar plus storage solutions will serve that growing demand?
Yeah, I think better than most people realize, right? Everyone's, as you said, we've been adding a lot of solar and wind, haven't added a lot of new peaking capacity, and that's largely because we've seen declining peak demand over the last 10 to 20 years outside of specific locations. But, as we're moving into a load growth era, you need new peaking resources. The question is, when do those peaks happen? And when you look at summer events, summer demand peaks are always on sunny days. And so solar resources actually serve that pretty well. And then that leaves you a fairly narrow window of time between when the sun sets and when demand declines as people go to bed. Storage serves that peak quite well as well. And so that's kind of what we've seen in Texas over the last 5 years or so, is that all the solar and storage has left the system relatively long during the summer now. The bigger question is what happens in the winter. And so, solar and storage don't do winter peaks well. Winter peaks tend to be long, tend to be flat, tend to be overnight, tend to be associated with minimal wind. And so a winter peak is much, much, much harder to serve. The question, though, is how often do those come and how big a deal are they really, right? If you're a data center and you're worried about a winter peak in Texas or in PJM, and that winter peak only happens once every 3, 4, 5 years and might only be for one night, how big of a deal is that really? Are you willing to curtail? You're willing to pay somebody else to curtail? Are you willing, or do you think you're going to see a demand reduction? If you're running an inference model on a data center, chances are people aren't going to be running a ton of AI queries in the middle of the night during a winter storm. So I think, ultimately, I think solar and storage is a better solution than people realize. It also allows you to move faster than people realize. It also avoids some of the permitting and noise problems that other people might have with local gas install. I think gas is more complicated than people realize, and solar and storage is better than people realize. But ultimately, it's all about what is the peak event that you're trying to manage. Summer peaks are pretty manageable with solar and storage. Winter peaks are very much not.
And along those lines, Fahad, in our pre-call for the forum, you brought up a really important point, which was that energy supply and demand shouldn't really be thought of in terms of one monolithic U.S. energy market, but rather it's critically a region by region evaluation. Do you see new annual installs in those regions that aren't overly influenced by data center development still being dominated in the near term by large-scale solar plus storage installs? And then as you answer that, I have one follow-up too. And that would be, do you see solar plus storage eventually completely replacing standalone solar?
Thanks, John. No, absolutely. We hear thoughts around broad statements of can storage do this? Can gas fill this spot? Or can different things. It's very localized, right? You might not have pipelines going into certain areas of the country where you might be siting data centers, so gas might not be an option there. In certain parts of Texas, gas might be the best option, right? So we'll have to look at side by side, area by area. And I do definitely believe, I agree totally with Brent, that it's going to be resource specific, it's going to be site specific, it's going to be load specific in the solutions that we have to build through. I think in some areas, I agree with you, John, that solar plus storage will be the solution, and that's what most developers are doing. And I would expect to see the pricing around that to reflect that. No developer is going to build any power projects or any storage project unless the pricing impacts are there, so they can make a return. No, agree totally. Some places up in Northeast, we might not have gas infrastructure available to build this out. Solar storage might be the only option, or solar plus wind plus storage might be the only option, right? So I personally think that there will be a place for all electricity generating options. I don't think there will be like one solution fits all. I don't think there will be one silver bullet that we've been hearing for so long. That's where we are headed as a company. That's what we are looking at, and I think that's where most of the industry will move eventually.
During our pre-call, Bobby, you actually mentioned the fact that there's certain areas where gas supply may not be a solution at all. In the 5 to 7 years. Could you expand on that a sec?
Well, yeah, look, there are portions in the United States, particularly Appalachia, Southeast, that doesn't have a lot of gas pipeline connectivity. There's also a lot of NIMBYisms going on where people don't want pipelines coming through. And they also have a significant investment in legacy coal-fired generating capacity. So those are forces that might steer away from gas, and solar and wind doesn't work as well in the east southeast unless you have storage. Renewables plus storage, you're good. Renewables alone, and then using fossil fuels as a cutover, that has its challenges. And I think also with respect to you're seeing tremendous latency in gas plants getting permitted, gas plants getting equipment. So for the next 5 years, I don't see any meaningful change in the players in the electricity supplying business. I think you'll have all of them, just like Fahad was saying. I think there's room for everybody at the table.
I mean, let's keep in
Yeah.
mind too, there could be a change of party in 2 years in the executive branch of the government, right? What does that mean for permitting, right? What does that mean for,
Right.
if we're looking at gas plants that aren't going to be online for 5 years, what's its political outlook going to look like 5 years from now? It could be very different than today. It's easy to get caught into kind of what today's political climate is.
Yeah, and that's hanging over every decision being made today. That question. That's a good point, Brent. Ken,
And I think also, Brent, I don't want to leave that point too fast because you could see the return of subsidies in terms of ITCs.
we're gonna get there because
Yeah.
I want to talk about that at some point during these 90 minutes for sure. But Ken, moving on to you worked on some of the largest renewable portfolios in the country. How much of this reliability crisis narrative we're hearing so much about today is driven by real grid constraints versus how much is being driven by political spin or capital market signaling? And if you feel as though there is some of the latter occurring, does that distinction actually change the way you guys at Cobra are planning for the future?
No, it's an interesting concept. Quite frankly, the issue is real. There is obviously a grid constraint that we have as terms of a reliability perspective. But there's also an amplification of that issue with regards to capital and political purposes. And what's happening is they're both feeding into each other and kind of working off of each other at the same time, right? We're seeing interconnection queues across markets spanning 5 to 7 years, and
Yeah.
there's just a big misunderstanding with how the grid is designed as a centralized dispatchable generation, where even when they do their forecast from 5 years ago, this load growth that we're seeing from data centers, it was just not planned 5 years ago, quite frankly.
Right.
And from my perspective, when I started my career with Entergy on more of the technical side, where I was in substation protection, asset planning, and grid support engineering, I don't think a lot of people appreciate and realize just how much of our grid is using equipment and infrastructure that was deployed as far back as the 1950s. So that is a real constraint. So it's absolutely critical. It's absolutely a real issue. But what's happening is it's also being used as somewhat of a proxy for shifting capital preferences towards dispatchable generation, and then the political signaling has become around energy security, energy independence, and domesticating supply chains, right? So for us at Cobra, the way we handle this is essentially prioritizing sites that do have interconnection rights that aren't being fully utilized, understanding which areas are transmission constrained versus which are not, and trying to focus on those that have demonstrated transmission access, and then focusing on areas also that long-term offtake and PPA agreements are realistic, right? So that's how we're managing that piece of the risk here at Cobra.
That's
I'll
great.
add, I'll add there, that's the advantage of having locational marginal pricing is that you can actually see what's happening in the transmission system by what's happening with prices at a locational level. In the
Absolutely.
markets where you have that, and we're getting a lot of expansion in the West, so hopefully we'll be able to see a lot more relatively soon. Southeast is still kind of a black box, but
Exactly.
if you want to see what's happening with congestion, you can see it in the prices.
Absolutely.
And just real quick, Ken and Fahad, I'm kind of curious with your operating assets. So are you seeing the congestion that you're actually realizing being a little greater than what was originally planned?
From our perspective, no, but that's because we planned for that ahead of time, right? So we account for that when we're doing our early site and origination activities on our project. So we're not quite seeing that yet. Granted, our operating assets are realistically new just in the past really few days, right? For our first assets that are operational within the U.S. But from our side, we also plan for that early on.
What about you, Fahad?
I would say, John, we are seeing more congestion coming into the market. Again, it's very localized. It depends on where you build out, and I mean, PJM not so much, MISO California not so much, Texas definitely. But to just in general, right? Like, so when we build out an asset, like, or when we build out, so I'm sure Ken is going to agree, you look at a 35-year horizon, right? Like, I'm not looking at it from a lender's perspective or tax equity or somebody else who might have a much shorter perspective on what the interconnection is going to look like, or what congestion might look like, what basis might look like, right? We look at it for 35 years. If we have trust in the growth that's being shown right now, that's what we finance, that's what we build. To Brent's point, to Bobby thing, so we were talking about, right? Like, if this load growth is going to come somewhere, somebody has to provide the electrons, right? So you might have, some congestion now. It might get relieved in a little bit, and I'm a firm believer that the market will come to an equilibrium. If there are not enough price signals for renewables, if there are not enough price signals for batteries, people are not going to build them. No developer is going to lose money on these assets, right? So they need to have projection, they need to have conviction in their projections, and one year you might, be down, another year might be up.
Yeah, that's a good answer, man. I want to introduce a concept throughout this. I always find it a little fun with these panels to have rapid fire questions at the end of each topic, if time permits, and we're going to squeeze these things in. So the rules of the rapid fire question will be: each one of you panelists must answer the question, but you must limit your answer to one sentence, maybe two. And that's it. And there's no elaboration. You just get your perspective out there and we let it float. So my very first question for topic one is this: 5 to 7 years from now, in terms of new capacity being added, what will be the top generation resource under construction at that time? So we're out there 2032, 2033. What will be the top generation resource under construction at that time? And is the number two resource of new adds a distant second or a very close second to what's taking over the market? Bobby, let's start with you.
I think gas is going to be number one and renewables are going to be number two, and it's going to depend on whether subsidies are available from the government to induce renewable spending.
Distant number two or close number two?
No, if the tax credits return, I think you'll see a close number two.
Ken, where are you from?
It'll be a distant two.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I see a little bit of a different view. I think utility scale solar will still be number one, and I think gas will be a close number two. If I had a crystal ball, which I wish I did, I'd probably have a lot more money by now. But more importantly, either way, battery storage is going to be a significant hybrid option, no matter what option will be in both instances.
100%.
That's a little more than two sentences for Ken.
Yeah,
couldn't help it. Couldn't help
you
it.
get one penalty right there, Ken.
Yeah.
There's a penalty.
I would say I agree with Ken. I think solar will be, or renewables in general will be a little bit higher than new generation build will be higher than gas. Gas will be a close second, regardless of whether incentives are there or not.
Brent, where do you fall out?
If we think in terms of peaking capacity, I think gas and storage will be 1 and 2, depending on and which one's 1, which one's 2 will depend on the location. If you think, total resource capacity, solar is going to be pretty big in there, yeah, regardless of tax incentives.
I'm very happy to hear these responses. You guys are knee deep in the industry. And it wasn't just, gas is going to take over the world. Actually, that was a good...
I think you also have to separate, John, U.S. versus rest of world. This is a recurring theme when we're talking about this, because the rest of the world outside of the U.S., they don't have the same compulsions or ability to to go one way or the other.
Good point. All right, let's move on to topic number two. And topic number two is somewhat related to topic one, but it's from the money side of the equation. The question is capital supply market redirecting its priorities and investments as it relates to investments in energy? Since the beginning of 2025, we've seen major changes to federal government energy policy and also a massive paradigm shift in the energy sector. The current administration has severely curtailed the IRA's long-term support for the development of solar and wind. And from the perspective of a paradigm shift, the electricity demand created by the rapidly evolving AI industry requires enormous amounts of immediately dispatchable power, which is the primary beneficial attribute of natural gas and modular electric generators. Let's discuss the potential of a pending major reallocation of energy-related investment capital that may occur in the short term. On this topic, Bobby, let's start with you. Okay, so we're going to the money side of this potential shift in capital to be reallocated among various energy-related capital being reallocated. And Bobby, I want to come to you from an M&A perspective. My question for you is whether you think the current federal emphasis on a return to fossil fuel-based power generation has caused an increase in activity above 2024 type levels. And is the incremental activity more so in the sale of solar and wind development assets, or is it more heavily skewed toward the acquisition of fossil fuel-based generation portfolios? And as a second follow-up to that, are you seeing more folks looking to sell platforms or more folks looking to buy platforms?
Okay, so with respect to renewables, we're definitely seeing sell pressures because the deals aren't economical without the tax incentives. And I won't say their name, but I know a sponsor out in California, very well known, very politically connected guys that are trying to fire sale every one of their renewable energy assets at this juncture. And we're seeing capital deployed on the fossil fuels, but it's for basically consolidation, stripping out combined M&A combined G&A, and just running the assets more efficiently. It's not like anybody is building, wanting to build a new coal-fired power plant. They're not looking to, nuclear is not really there yet. And you talk about NIMBYism, wait till people decide that there's going to be a nuclear plant in their backyard versus a data center. So that's what we're seeing.
And it's interesting, and maybe Fahad and Ken, I'd like to get your perspectives on this. I get a sense the well-capitalized, deep-pocket developers aren't in the same position as these folks who did some early-stage development, and their entire business model was to flip deals at NTP, notice to proceed to construction, and therefore they've got no annuity coming in from operating assets that can get through this currently, who knows how long the current environment's going to last, the anti-renewables environment's going to last. But the folks with a sound balance sheet, well-capitalized, and operating assets, I personally think this could be a buying opportunity. Is that your read or not?
From our side, absolutely. It's definitely a buying opportunity. We're somewhat seeing that as a buyer's market now, quite frankly. But what makes it an issue with this is there's so many projects that were heavily reliant on the tax incentives, but not relying on true supply and demand economics, which we've talked about, right? We've seen it in the hydrogen case with the market willingness to spend, and when it comes to that, essentially, at the end of the day, the reason we're seeing solar doing well at the moment right now, still having a moment, is because there is so much demand powered by data centers and AI. And with that, in regard to what we're seeing is not so much the prospect of acquiring a project, but rather getting inundated with a mix of good projects that can stand alone on its own with, based on those supply and demand economics versus, ones that we're heavily reliant on safe harboring and trying to thread the needle and be super, almost superhuman to get these projects across the finish line. And delineating between the two, that's where the challenge really is in order to make sure we're acquiring projects that match with our portfolio.
Any thoughts,
Yeah.
Fahad?
I feel that this all has been a buyer's market for, I don't know, for a few years now. But that said, John, I think we're at like a weird situation in the industry right now, right? Like FEOC is another, sword hanging over people's head.
Yep.
I do agree with you that developers who are well capitalized, who have already operating assets, are in a better position than developers that are not that well capitalized, who are, develop and flip shops, who used to command a premium in the market, depending on like which state they worked in, right? Like, so Texas is different than, let's say, anywhere in PJM. If you have a decently, well advanced project, you could have commanded a lot of premium. DG assets were commanding crazy premiums in the market, right? So I will be surprised, depending on where, who knows what's happened in Washington. I don't have a crystal ball. If things get more clear, I think that will help move things along a little better. But I would just say one thing, right? When we might go to that topic in a little bit, but agree with Ken that it's supply and demand economics, right? We know that the demand is going to get there. We know it's going to take a mix of all generating assets, right? If the incentives go away, if other things go away, if there is a federal restriction, that will just thin the crowd of developers, and the price will normalize. You will just see an increase in electricity price. If the 30%, 40% ITCs go away, then the developers will. There is still a demand for it, right? So developers will just have to increase. The PPAs will increase. So
That's math.
that's math, right?
Yeah.
I'll just add, we called this out 2 years ago, just from a basic numbers perspective. You're not going to build 200 gigawatts of solar in a 100 gigawatt peaking system, right? Like there are too many projects in the queue. There are too many projects in development. There were too many develop and flip shops that we're all going to be seeking to sell at the same time. And we said, this is going to be a good time for patient capital, and it's going to be a really tough time for people that need to recycle capital. And you could just look at that just from basic logic and looking at the size of the queue.
We're already seeing that, Brent, right? Like 3 years ago, 4 years ago, this is take Texas, for example, right? 3 years, 4 years ago, average prices were what, 20 to 30 bucks a megawatt hour. Right now, they're what, $40 to $50?
$50.
And this is what, 3 years? And it's not even that much demand has come on like that we were expecting. So markets have a way to fix this. I mean, I think that this is pure economics.
Yeah.
There is one, sorry, John, there is one distinction I do want to make in here. And, that's the distinction between developers and IPPs, right? Because, and Fahad and I, we're more on the IPP side, but you see these developers and they'll, in their development process, they offer these terms and these conditions, just because they're trying to get their projects, to your point earlier about NTP, right? And there is quite a bit of delineation because, they're trying to develop up to a point to flip. Whereas we're looking at projects, whether it's greenfield or through M&A, as if we're going to own the asset for the entire life of the project, right? And that's a real delineation.
35 years, and then when I was on your side of the table, I actually had, as a younger guy, I was looking 35 years out. I wasn't looking at the term because I was with the capitalized entity. Yeah.
Right.
Well, Brett, though, I do want to follow up on something a little interesting. I want to get your take on this. Given the severe backlog in the gas turbine deliveries, to what extent are hyperscalers still investing in clean energy, and how does the gas turbine backlog we hear so much about impact the overall outlook for solar and wind development?
Yeah, I talked about this a little bit earlier on the first question, but you hear a lot about gas, right? Data centers, hyperscalers are talking 24/7. You need 24/7 power, 24/7 power, 24/7 power. But that assumes you can get 24/7 power, which you can't. And it is, even if you build gas, you need the turbine, which turbines are constrained. But that's actually becoming the supply equipment is becoming less and less of the bottleneck because there's enough reciprocating engines, DG solutions, turbines from other places. Like that's becoming less of the problem. Not that it's not a problem, there's still a delay, but it's less of the bottleneck. We're hitting an EPC bottleneck now where you might be able to get it, doesn't mean you can get it built. That assumes you can get the permitting. That assumes you've got a community that's willing to host it and deal with the noise and so on and the emissions. That also assumes that you can get the fuel in constrained conditions, right? When I talked about earlier, when you talk about a winter peaking system, the systems where winter is the biggest reliability risk. When you have a reliability problem, it's when you get a gas disruption. It's when you get a gas supply disruption. You have gas plants on outage from freezing conditions as well. And so if you're building a behind the meter gas solution or you're trying to contract new gas capacity, that doesn't necessarily mean that you could still get the fuel delivery, and it doesn't mean that your system is going to be up during a winter storm, right? So gas just isn't as good of a solution as I think people think it is. And when you start looking at kind of how well solar and storage might be able to serve your problem, be able to move faster, less of an EPC constraint, less of a backlog on supply, maybe less NIMBYism opposition, maybe less peaking risk, but also, it's not going to solve your winter peak, but maybe your winter peak doesn't come along that often, right? And so maybe that's not as big a deal as you think. And so I think that's something that we're gonna see is, 2025 was the year of recognizing like where are we going to get capacity from. 2026, I think, is going to be the year of recognizing that gas may not be the magic wand that people want it to be. So we're still hearing a lot about gas, but I don't know that it's going to work as well of a solution as people think it will. People talk a little about nuclear. I'll just say nuclear, no one's building new nuclear merchant, right?
Yeah, we're going to get
always
there. I do want to start talking about that. But Bobby, along these lines, though, everybody focuses on the turbines themselves, but the turbines don't really spin if they don't have gas supply. Do you see any issues with the currently projected gas turbine build out to support data centers? Do you see any pipeline supply the obtaining of easements being underestimated or things like
Oh,
that? Do
yeah.
you see pipelines becoming an issue, not just the turbines, but you got to feed those turbines. Do you
Particularly when
see
you
the development
get
of
into
pipeline? Go
yeah,
ahead.
John, when you get into dense populations in the Northeast, this is a huge problem,
Huge.
right? There's not in my backyard. And I will say this, I know that it's the dirty word of the energy slate, but coal is the only energy that works no matter what the weather is. So saying that you're going to see coal go away, it's just not going to happen. It's going to be, you're seeing, in fact, if you look at us, I forget where the slide, it was maybe Brookings, they had a slide that shows fossil fuels as a number of kilowatt hours being produced over like the last 5 years, pretty consistent. But as a percentage of the total electricity generated, it's obviously gone down because renewables have come online. You have folks like Southern and Dominion and Duke who are saying that they are not retiring their coal-fired capacity by 2035. In fact, they're bringing more online to meet these, interim demands. So I think there's a place for everything. I really do. But I think that the gas is not the panacea. And I also respectfully don't think solar and storage is that great either, because you got to get the solar from the areas where solar is efficiently generated across very expensive high tension power lines who have their own form of NIMBYism associated with them to get it
Yes.
to the power consuming markets in the east and southeast.
So there really is no one right solution. It's
Yeah, I don't think so.
everything in the above categories, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. You bring up, the Northeast. I'm wondering, there's a huge concentration of development stage data centers. Isn't it in the Virginia area? Isn't it one of the top?
Yeah, absolutely. Northern Virginia is
And would you consider that part of that problem with the supply?
absolutely. Yeah.
That's why you see data centers going somewhere else now.
Yeah.
Going someplace else. And yet, I have to say, Virginia, I don't know the solar resources in Virginia and actually offshore wind resources in Virginia. That's not too shabby. The resources that are available from a renewable solution for that equation. So
And you're
that's
seeing
very interesting.
Ohio and Indiana are having huge hyperscale centers being built there. You need fiber, you need energy, you need land, you need a behind the meter power solution.
That's why you see a a lot of loads going into West Texas because that's where the solar and the wind
Yeah.
are. A lot of load is going into regulated utility territories because the regulated utilities can build whatever they need and rate base it, right?
Right.
And that ability to get new projects financed is huge, right? Even gas, no one's building new merchant gas. Everything's being built with an offtake or with a rate base somehow.
Okay. We're approaching the end of topic 2, which means a rapid fire question number 2. And it goes like this. Will the power demands of our AI paradigm shift cause a reallocation of the existing pool of energy-related investment capital? Or will it cause a very significant increase in the amount of investment capital dedicated to the energy sector? Bobby, start. I'm just going across my screen. So Bobby, you go first.
Nice, picking on me. Yeah, I think it's going to increase significantly.
Fahad, yeah, you shifted. Fahad,
Yeah, definitely, it's going to increase.
definitely. Ken,
I'm gonna say both, but there is an edge towards an increase, but I think both.
and Brent.
Increase. We haven't had to build new stuff at this scale in a while.
Yeah.
So it's interesting if you do believe if we have a couple of global deep pocket entities here, well capitalized. If by chance certain parties feel as though there will be a significant increase in CapEx dedicated to building out energy, has that piqued the interest of Grupo Cobra or Total? Ken, you
I
go
was I
first.
was I was I was waiting on Fahad.
I'll
Honestly,
go first. No, again, Total strategy is Total strategy. We want to be one of the top 2 or 3 big energy players in the world overall. So our strategy hasn't changed. If we see value in a certain area, we will go there. We don't again, from our perspective, we don't build based on where the market is going. We build on based on where our strategy is, and our strategy has ours has evolved over years, but it's we have a certain line of sight into where we want to be, and we're gonna be there. Does it mean that it cannot change in the future? Well, we also won't be. If there's opportunity coming there, well, definitely we're gonna go there and take it. But as of right now, our strategy is where our strategy is. We're gonna wait and see where the things shake out and where there's sort of more opportunity.
yep. And from our perspective, because we, being a European-based company like Total is exactly, we're having a similar perspective, right? And at the end of the day, we're going to be opportunistic. So it depends on, again, we've talked about it earlier. There really isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. If there was, would we even be able to afford it? Quite frankly, right? And it's got to be geographic specific. It's got to be technology and cost specific as well, schedule specific as well. And so with all those constraints in mind, part of our strategy is to deploy energy projects. Right now it is renewable, but if that means moving in forward towards combined cycle as part of our portfolio or even nuclear, we're absolutely going to explore that.
Yeah, I agree totally, Ken. I mean, yeah, we have combined cycle now in our portfolio here in the US and in Europe, and then we'll continue to increase that as if there are new projects being built or we develop ourselves. We have pretty significant gas footprint in the US and globally, so that fits right into our overall piece. So yeah, we position ourselves to win and to see where the opportunities exist.
Exactly.
Yeah, all right, let's migrate the conversation. Regulation these days is really up in the air. It's changing almost monthly. And so topic 3 will cover the current regulatory environment. The Inflation Reduction Act attempted to provide large-scale energy developers from across the globe the long-term regulatory stability here in the US needed for them to go about building true and meaningful enterprise value in the US carbon-free space. Some of the folks right here have gone ahead and done that. From 2022 to 2025, the Act did yield some really, really significant results along those lines. We saw a vast expansion in our client base. with large-scale foreign entities coming in here and building real companies, sustainable companies, lots of jobs across the entire spectrum of professional skill sets. The July 2025 enactment of OBA kind of upended that platform quite a bit. I'd like to pivot the conversation right now, if we could, to what you all believe might be the near to midterm market impact of OBA, or any other new regs that may have come along that aren't getting quite as much attention. This is a regulatory subject, so Bobby, you get the honors of going first. What do you consider, Bobby, might be the most interesting supply chain twist that may evolve over time as a consequence of the FEOC regs? And are you seeing any potential workarounds our foreign suppliers may implement to mitigate the impact of FEOC regs on their share of the U.S. market? What are you seeing out there, Bobby?
And so there's no workarounds for FEOC, okay? And you do not want to run the risk that you're relying on certifications from your suppliers and have all your tax credits at risk, not to mention other things that might happen to you for bringing in equipment components from foreign entities. You're seeing some foreign suppliers establish clean manufacturing lines where they're only doing it in countries that are not on the suspicious list. You're also seeing people trying to get foreign suppliers to reduce their operational control over a subsidiary in the country to get around that. You've seen people try to change that headquarters. That don't work. And the problem is China is the most cost-effective manufacturer of solar in the world, and China right now is our very significant foe, if you will. So if you want to do renewables, and you want to do it in the U.S., you're going to have to agree to increase costs in your development, and you got to make sure. Back to what Ken and Fahad were saying before, it's a demand-based analysis. You don't make it's like the old tax shelters in the 80s. That you don't invest based on what tax benefit you get. You invest because there's a real business there of producing power, and there's a demand for it.
Right.
I was about to say, if Bobby has unlocked FEOC, please let me know.
I have to ask though. I mean, I read early on, and keep me honest here if it's changed or not. But if developers like Grupo Cobra or Total, or folks like you, receive some sort of representation letter from an entity, the IRS will allow you to rely on it, except they reserve the right to circle back and do an audit 2, 3, 4 years from now and say, oops, that was a fraudulent representation letter. Are you even, that seems like a risk. First of all, for those out there getting ITC insurance, I'm not even sure how insurable something like that is from the ITC insurance companies. But how are you guys managing right now? There is no, somebody makes a claim that they're in compliance. You're trying to procure critical components on a deadline, on a timeline that's very aggressive, and you get this little piece of paper. How much reliance are you using for that? Or are you guys actually sending resources to do significant due diligence on those suppliers?
Just like the know your customer rules in a bank, John.
It may be, yeah. But for Fahad, Ken, are you throwing resources at actually due diligence on the suppliers?
To some degree, we are actually putting forth that effort because we're still pursuing to some degree these tax incentives that are very valuable to the projects. We absolutely work to try to understand the impact from a FEOC perspective with the suppliers of how it can impact our projects and our returns overall. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about these, it's an optionality piece that helps our projects, but it can't be the main basis for the bankable piece of it at the end of the day, right? Because supply and demand economics are going to have to take effect. And the other side of it too, we probably will talk about this in a bit, I'm sure, is there's just a lack of there's just so much unclear guidance with regards to FEOC. moving forward. One of the constraints we've seen in a recent SEIA meeting was with regards to how utility upgrades impact your project. And as you know, on the developer and IPP side, we don't really have clairvoyance into what the utility is doing. They have blanket contracts and they have very strict standards that they follow on each of their projects. And who those suppliers are, where that material comes from, we don't have control on that. So the fact that, FEOC implications with what they do can impact our incentives and returns, quite frankly, to say it kindly, it's quite maddening.
Yeah, that does seem dicey to me as well.
Yeah, I'll just add, John, don't think there's any clarity on FEOC. I don't think there's any developer here who has clarity. I don't think there's any bank here who has clarity. I don't think we know what to do. I think we're all looking at it in real time, trying to figure it out. And what from experience, these things do tend to get to like a market standard. So right now, what we're all waiting for is what is that market standard going to be, at which the banks are comfortable financing, at which the capital is going to come in. And as of today, like May 6th, nobody has clear picture on.
I don't know how you guys plan for 3 to 5 years. I'll be perfectly honest with you. And I've been around the game for a long time, and these times in particular.
It's patient capital, John. It's who can be patient here. And this will thin out the herd, right? So if there are people who cannot wait, then it might be.
I would say it's both that, Fahad. It's patient capital, but it's also clear and consistent execution across the board, right? And that's the other piece that people kind of miss too when it comes to deploying capital, right? They think a lot of times, okay, I can just throw money at a situation and solve it. And quite frankly, money's not going to replace expertise in a lot of ways, right? And so that's a big piece of it as well.
Yeah, Fahad, I've seen it firsthand. You and I have worked together for years now. You've developed massive solar plus storage projects over the years. And you built a really impressive, diversified portfolio of these large-scale installations. Those projects, we saw it firsthand. Those projects took you years to develop, permit, and then construct. When you review the sunset dates of OBA, do you believe initiating right now a very large-scale solar plus storage install will still be feasible if you have to assume only the battery component of the build receives a 30% or more ITC? Does that still pencil for you?
As of this moment, batteries are very interesting area for us. We all own our own battery company as well, SAFT. There were clear arbitrage opportunities. There were clear battery opportunities especially in Texas for a player like TotalEnergies, who we'd like to play in merchant markets. We like to play in deregulated markets, right? Like that's where we think our core strengths come, and then that's where we can distinguish ourselves from other people. There were clear opportunities in Texas, as Brent was talking at the start of the meeting. Some of those opportunities have now gone away because people did move in bulk to try to figure that out. I would personally think, John, that at a certain, again, these things go down and these things go up. There will be demand coming in. If there's not enough build out there, there will again be spikes. There will again be batteries out there to support them. You would need them. I think fundamentally we all agree that batteries have a scope in the energy future, right? So as of right now, I don't know if there is enough sufficient forecasts around battery revenues that they can support a standalone battery project. There could be, opportunities here and there that you could do, or you could co-locate them with solar or wind, try to provide a firm solution. In a couple of years, yeah, definitely. The markets will. There's always a way to realign themselves and come to a equilibrium. So we all thought that the 2021, the 2022 spikes in the market, that they'll keep happening. But for all said and done, I think that Brent, maybe you can agree with this, but batteries did what they were intended to do in this market, and maybe did it really well, especially in Texas, so that we don't see as many spikes, as many price situations for a company like us. So it's been businesses, volatility, and we price that in. That's not, but for an overall market or a consumer, they did exactly what they were intended to do.
Yeah, Fahad, you talked earlier about equilibrium, right? Equilibriums aren't always a flat line, right?
Exactly.
There's some overcorrection, some undercorrection, and we've always talked about equilibrium. We've always talked about equilibriums are going to be bumpy. We forecast it as a flat line because we don't pretend that we can know what the bumps are going to look like. But you rush in, you overbuild, demand growth shows up, it gets tight again. You overbuild storage, and then that improves the economics of solar and wind. You build more solar and wind, that improves the economics of storage. These things, you talked about patience and patient capital. We have a tendency to get caught up in whatever the flavor of the moment is. We see it politically as well. From a policy standpoint, there's a very pro-gas, anti-renewables executive branch right now. We're not necessarily going to have that 3 years from now. And so, how does that change we're just going to whipsaw back the other direction. I think, we talk a lot about trying to take a long-term view on where markets are headed, on where policy is headed. And I don't have a magic wand or a crystal ball. I can't tell you exactly what 2035 looks like, but I'm pretty confident it's not going to look exactly like 2025. And so we have to think pretty carefully about, what are long-term trends likely to look like, and how do we not get too caught up in what's happening with tariff policy today, what's happening with permitting policy today. It has implications for projects today, but when you look at the market outlook for a project today, you have to look at a 15 to 20 plus year time frame, and that has to account for a lot of potential changes at the political level, at the market level. And yeah, we have to take a long-term view on all this stuff.
The logical level too, Brent, right? Like the battery technology today might not be battery technology 10 years from now, solar technology today, who knows, wind repowers, how this landscape will change in 10 years, 15 years. Yeah. So you have to take a position as developers, you have to take a position and have faith in the industry. And then
I get a sense you might want to have a comment here. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Are you speaking to me? I'm sorry.
Yeah. So you look like you want to
I would say that I agree. The private equity fund versus the independent power producer has a much different outlook.
That's a good point.
Okay, private capital has been the primary financier for these projects, with the idea that they're going to flip them to IPPs. That was the idea. That's number one. So I also think that with respect to the, Brent mentioned that you see a lot of renewable load in like West Texas, and how lucky we are to have three of us that are from the great state of Texas. The problem is that nobody's talking about cooling, and nobody's talking about water. And if you're building a hyperscale data center, the farmers are not going to be happy with you at all about you pumping down their aquifer for cooling. But there's innovation coming, right? There's when we were talking before, there's some interesting two-phase companies like NewCool and their portfolio company of Inventum, Excelsius, and they do the DTC cooling, which is the direct to chip, right? It's more expensive to put that in now, but ultimately it's much more efficient. So therefore, you might be able to locate centers in other places away from they always say put your factory right by your feedstock. Maybe you don't need to do that if you get some of these other innovations coming along the way. And that's one thing that in the US still, maybe more than other countries in the world, we still have the capacity for innovation and still have the desire for innovation. Yeah. Sorry, not to sound like a political speech.
Yeah, just one final question on this topic. You see a lot of folks coming through your doors asking for an energy forecast one way or the other. Do you believe are you seeing any new areas of investment opportunities popping up as a direct result of the enactment of OBA? We tend to view OBA as taking away, but Do you see new opportunities being created by OBA?
I think we've seen a lot of noise around geothermal, a lot of noise around new nuclear. We'll see what happens with both of those. I'm much more skeptical about SMRs than some of my colleagues, but I'm also a little bit more cautious on enhanced geothermal, like the Fervos of the world. There's a lot of talk about learning curves, but learning curves usually rely on lots of repetition of identical things. And repetition in the thousands to millions range. That's how you really drive a learning curve. And so when you're talking about tens to hundreds of installations and each one being somewhat custom, it's hard to see the same kind of learning curves. But I think the biggest change hasn't necessarily been OBA. It's been gas turbine cost tripling, right? I think 3 years ago we were talking about storage and gas. Are they competitive and blah 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 blah. And now we're looking at, you could build 8-hour storage for $2,000 a kilowatt, and then you throw a 30% ITC, you throw in an energy community that's another 10%, you do a step up on it that's another 10%, and now you're talking about $1,000 a kilowatt. And you compare that to a gas plant that's not, $800 a kilowatt anymore. It's 2,500 a kilowatt, maybe 3,000 a kilowatt, depending on how big it is and whether you need pipeline upgrades. And so I think we're just in a completely different landscape of how storage competes with gas than we were 3 years ago. And I think the narrative that turbines are constrained and getting expensive isn't new, but I don't know that folks have really connected the dots on what that means for the relative economics of gas versus storage. And they have completely changed over the last couple of years.
And that's a really good point, because for those of us in the business, that does jump out at you. Not only do, in my opinion, and not as educated as yours.
Hey, John,
on the LCOE equation, you have higher installed costs with the turbines. You also have the unpredictability of the cost of fuel supply over the long term. Where the heck are natural gas prices going in 15 years from now? Because all of us seem to be old school in the sense that you don't build for tomorrow. You're building an investment that's going to last 30 years. What the heck is the natural gas price going to be 10, 15, 20 years from now? How do you forecast that? What's your levelized cost of energy to build that thing and operate that thing over the long haul? I think that just jumps out at me.
Absolutely. But John, there is one piece I do want to highlight, kind of back to Bobby's point earlier about water, and that's really these grassroots movements that we're seeing in local counties in Texas here, right? So, and this is something that I want to highlight to my, fellow developers and IPPs that are possibly on this call right now, is the amount of pushback that we're receiving for solar, battery storage, and data centers. They're all kind of lumped in together. My colleagues and I, we were recently at a public hearing to talk about a possibility of a moratorium on battery storage. And it's interesting because these people, the crux of it all, they were complaining about data centers, and they're complaining about data centers on Facebook, which is, still funny. We talked about this before. It's like complaining about going to a steakhouse and protesting the use of cows, right? It doesn't make sense. But what it fundamentally boils down to, and what we consistently saw in these town halls and public hearings, is that there's just so much misinformation out there. And a lot of what we do and try to do with these stakeholders, these very important stakeholders, just try to educate what our projects do and the benefits that they provide. The consistent message that did come back was the safety and environmental impact on their communities, especially with regards to fire, right? And we have good data on that now about how to mitigate those issues. But that is not going to be sufficient enough without consistent and clear communication with these public entities, right? And getting out there and having these difficult conversations, even if it means putting yourself in a unique or challenging situation where you're having a town or a county grilling you about very difficult topics.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, guys, ding, 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 ding. That's rapid fire question number 3. And this one's a little provocative. Do you believe Congress will cause some lesser amount of ITC and PTCs to be reinstated for solar and wind projects sometime after the midterms, but before January 1st, 2028? I'm talking about ITCs in the range of like maybe a 10 or 15% ITC. Again, Bobby, you go first.
Depends on if Iran's over. If Iran's over and the ours hold the Congress in the midterm? The answer is no.
Ken,
Possible, just not bankable. I would treat any of this as just upside optionality and not something you can underwrite in your base case.
Fahad.
I think all of us have been around in the industry long that no matter, I don't know how many times I've heard sunsetting of credits. So I can never put, something coming back out of the question. I agree with Ken. Can I bank it? No. If this comes in, it comes in. If it doesn't, then we're all going to plan based on what the regulations are at the moment.
And Brent.
Unlikely, and if you're going to hope for anything, hope for permit reform.
There you
I
go.
agree with you.
Very good.
Agree.
I agree with you.
I'm crossing my finger. I've been around too, and I said, you're going to get some guys in particular states worried about job creation, and they're not going to let go of this. That always seems to circle around. But my opinion doesn't count here. All right, man. Let's go to the fourth topic. It's our final topic. And it's you can't have a conversation about the U.S. energy market without discussing AI in particular. However, the implications of AI have been peppered throughout this entire conversation. But as a final topic, I really want to zone in on this 800-pound gorilla. If even half the pipeline of currently announced data center development targeted over the next, let's call it 5 to 10 years, actually comes online, the implications to adjacent energy consumers, component suppliers, and regulators, they're staggering. Ken, in your opinion, is co-located solar plus storage a genuinely viable solution for the reliability standards AI demands, or is it only a gas plus modular nuclear solution to carry that load?
We've hit on this a little bit earlier. I know Brent has definitely talked about it. Quite frankly, yes, storage is solar plus storage is absolutely viable. It handles low cost energy well, peak shaping extremely well that we see in Texas. It reduces overall system costs, improves reliability, and more importantly, and this is why we're having the moment that we're having, is it can be deployed quickly at scale. But again, we got to stop treating these energy solutions as catch-alls and one-size-fits-all solutions, because quite frankly, they're not. We need to apply the best solution for the circumstance, and that's in order to meet load demand, available resources, cost, as well as time to deploy. The other piece about this too, when you think about battery storage, just as co-located opportunities with storage or with solar and with even gas turbines, the power profile of what a battery storage facility can do as far as instantaneous load for a data center. And that's the thing, the way we're sizing these data centers is based on power, right? Like a 200 megawatt data center. The thing is they're not like a traditional factory where it's base load 200 megawatts for the entire 24/7. It's incremental, and then there's a peak period, right? And that peak period is typically, just a few hours a day. It's not, for the, full daytime or even for long stretches of time. And so batteries are really perfect for that because they can provide that load of that generation instantaneously to meet those load demands, primarily for cooling, and and then meet that need at a very effective way that, quite frankly, solar and gas turbines just can't do on its own. So there's absolutely a need, but it's not a one size fits all solution. It's a all-encompassing solution that must be looked at.
Anybody else want to add to that?
I'll just say, you hear a lot about 24/7 and the need for 24/7 and 5 nines reliability. And it's not about running 24/7. It's about, they want availability 24/7. They don't ever want to have to, not be able to do compute because there's no power, right?
Absolutely.
And with some of the variability you see on particularly these training model data centers where you're running compute and then you have to pause in order to kind of reset for the next compute, you're seeing hundreds of megawatts to gigawatt level variations in load. And so these new large scale data centers need on-site batteries anyway, just to buffer the load. It's too much variability for the grid to handle, for the on-site equipment to handle. So we're already seeing storage coming in just as a load buffer, right? And so if you already have storage as a load buffer, you might as well think about what else you might be able to do with storage. And when you look at speed to power, can you get stuff built? Can you get stuff built fast? Can you get stuff built with community support? I think as I said before, gas is not the magic wand that people want it to be. Um, and even then, I talked a little bit earlier about it's easy to get caught up in the moment of, what's the trend today, what's the challenge today. But we're talking about right now mostly training model data centers, right? And training models are trying to build the AI models that you can then utilize later. And the inference models are kind of when you go query an AI to go answer a question for you, right? And inference models are much more dependent on our activity, right? If lots of people are doing AI during the workday and then obviously not doing a lot overnight, that's going to lead to a lot more variability in a load profile than a training model that's just running 24/7. And on top of that, if you're running an inference model, maybe as a data center, you start to become more cost competitive in a more cost competitive environment 5 years from now. Maybe you're more willing to shift compute around geographically and sacrifice some latency, particularly at certain times. Maybe you're willing to make that sacrifice to have lower operating costs or lower energy costs. And so I think, as we look at what the landscape is 5 to 7 years from now, we could be operating under a different set of constraints, different set of pressures, and different set of needs than what we're focused on today.
Brent, just for the energy layman's perspective, do me a favor and could you very quickly define the difference between the training model data center and the inference model data center? Are there significant difference between the two that the folks, generalists in the energy sector, need to be aware of?
Yeah, so your training model is kind of what everybody's doing right now to build the models, right? And that's where speed to power is so critical. No one wants to fall behind. The faster you learn, the better you can make your model. The better you can make your model, the faster you can learn. The faster you can learn, the better you can make your model. It's everyone talks about an exponential curve, right? If you fall behind on the exponential curve, you fall behind fast. And so that's why there's such a critical emphasis right now on speed to power, getting online fast, 5 nines reliability. I don't want to sacrifice any kind of compute whatsoever because no one wants to fall behind because the consequences of falling behind are too large. Effectively, the cost of losing the AI race for any given company is much higher than the cost of whatever they have to pay to get power.
Yeah.
And so that's the pressure that we're in right now. And that's why everyone's talking about speed to power and everyone's talking about 24/7 and all of this. When you get into the inference model space, if I'm, asking AI, to help me plan my vacation, it doesn't necessarily need to give me an answer in 1 second versus 5 seconds versus 10 seconds. That's not necessarily going to be a huge driving force for me. And so, if we start to enter a world where, tech companies are actually having to compete on cost on, we start paying subscription models and things like that, then cost consciousness is going to get a lot more important. And, things that you can do in a cost conscious world, include sacrificing latency being the time delay between when you put in a request and when you get an answer back. And you can start shifting compute around geographically, and you can maybe start to assume that again during that winter storm that happens once every 5 years, maybe you actually don't have that high of a compute load, and so maybe you don't need reliability under those conditions because maybe you don't need that much power under those conditions. And you start to think a lot more carefully about some of these sorts of things, and solar and storage are a solution for some things, but not all. But maybe expecting to need less power might be another piece of the solution. Maybe curtailing under very rare circumstances might be part of your solution. Maybe shifting compute geographically might be part of your solution. And I think 10 years from now, we're going to be very much more in that space. And we might not be seeing the same kind of load growth pressures that we are in this current moment.
That was a great response. Thank you. Bobby, I have a question for you. If one believes that the modular nuclear, and I'm asking this question because I read an article, I think Bill Gates had kicked off the construction of a 345 megawatt modular nuke out in Wyoming. So he had the juice to get it all permitted, get going, and he's got a pilot going on, actively being built right now. And I hear constantly lots of chit chat about modular nuclear reactors providing a solution for data centers. If one believes that modular nuclear facilities are critical to help serve the AI market, what do you think is a realistic time frame for getting a meaningful number of them fully permitted and ready for NTP?
10 to 15 years.
10, okay, there you go. So we're 10 to 15, and that's ready for NTP, you're saying?
Right. Yep.
No kidding. Okay, that's great feedback, man, because you're kind of validating certain things in the back of my mind from years ago. All right. Anybody else have thoughts on modular nuclear reactors being the solution to the AI energy crisis?
I think the idea that you're going to improve the economies of scale by going smaller. I get the argument that you're going to be able to manufacture them in-house. It's going to be more repeatable, blah, 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 blah. But there's a reason that you do nuke big. And I think people that get too hyped up on SMRs forget that the reason that you do nukes big is to get the economies of scale.
Okay, that was fascinating. Thank you very much. Fahad, I have one more question on this topic. As a result of OBA sunset dates quickly coming upon us, they're right around the corner right now. Are you seeing in your interconnection queue positions in various ISOs you're working in opening up a bit as a result of other projects dropping out?
Short term, I don't think there is a rush just after OBBA. People trying to get Section 48 projects in and beginning constructions on a lot of these. So short term, I don't see a lot of projects dropping out. We'll see this year or the next, see what happens. But as of this moment, I haven't seen that much of a difference.
Anybody else? Ken, you seen any? And the reason I'm asking is I recently was having a conversation with a client who was pleasantly surprised his position in the queue dropped from, in a particular queue, I'm not going to mention where, but in a particular interconnection queue, he dropped from like number 26 down to 12. And he just got the notification, which accelerated things. So you're not seeing it either, Ken?
No, I'm not, and I'd be curious to see the reason why, right? And it depends on the region, depends on the area, right? I mean, it even could depend on network upgrade costs that you see a bunch of people, that were irregardless of what happened with, the one big beautiful bill. It's again, we have other constraints beyond just what has been occurring with the tax incentives, right? And it boils down to the interconnection piece of it.
Excellent. Okay. All right, man. Final topic, final rapid fire question here. What percentage of the current pipeline of announced data center developments will actually ever get built over the next 5 to 7 years? Bobby, you go first.
I'm guessing 25%.
25%?
Yep. Okay.
Ken.
A little bit more optimistic, but not a whole lot. 40% on my side.
40%. Fahad.
Yeah, nobody has a crystal ball. 40, 50%, maybe more. This is just some of these numbers are so crazy. You can't never.
Yeah,
you don't know.
Okay, Brett. Yeah, there's no elaboration necessary. Just throw that out there. Your educated position on this. Brent, go for it.
Depends on the location. ERCOT, I'm going to say 10% because their numbers are just silly. Rest of the country, maybe 30.
Where?
ERCOT.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
ERCOT's talking about 400 gigawatts, and there's just there's not the capital, there's not the labor, there's not the chips. 10% max. But other parts of the country, maybe 25, 30, and where you have like an announced deal like Meta and Entergy, that stuff's happening.
Okay, that was awesome. Very surprising. I like those rapid fire questions. All right, guys. So we're at a point right now. We've got 10 minutes to go, and we do want to open it up. We did factor in certain audience questions as part of the base of this conversation, but there are a couple others. So what I'd like to do now is maybe flip over to audience provided questions. And for those of you in the audience where we have not gotten to your question, rest assured, we will do our best to answer your questions and respond to you after this this conversation is over. Sometime in the near future, we'll respond. But I've got one of the questions piqued my interest right off the bat, and I'm going to just throw this out there, and anybody who wants to take it, take it. What do you consider the most overhyped or underhyped aspect of the energy market to be right now? Anybody have a thought on that?
Are these rapid fire or?
No, well, you can have your choice. You can make a statement and not support it, or just support it.
We've kind of talked about it a little bit. I'll take the first step here for this one. Hopefully I don't get soundbited later, or because I don't have a crystal ball on this, but really, we've learned this from hydrogen a little bit, with first of a kind technologies, and they both suffer from this same issue with confusing with the market, especially confusing technical feasibility with scalable deployability, right? And there is a clear difference, and we're consistently overestimating just how quickly we can get from first of a kind to nth of a kind, right? And really underappreciating how much infrastructure is required, the contracting space, the capital discipline, all of that is required. So overhyped, I'm going to say for now, first of a kind technologies, just because of a scalability issue. And then underhyped, I mean, we talk about it, but it doesn't get talked about enough, is just transmission scarcity, especially with regards to, AI and delivering power from one source to the end entity.
Yeah, that's for sure. Anybody else want to add to that?
I agree with Ken on the overhyped. On the underhyped, I think load flexibility. We have a lot of problems with peak demand and grid utilization, and we have a lack of incentives for most load to shift its peak. And I think there's a lot of room for retail rate reform in order to drive actual changes to underlying demand shapes. I think that's a huge area of opportunity, and it's underappreciated.
Brent, and you triggered a thought that when we had the pre-call for this, did I hear you correctly? The total available capacity out in and I don't want to have this monolithic energy concept throughout the United States, but let's go there for a second. The total capacity isn't what the issue is. The issue is peak capacity. Would you?
Yeah,
am I saying that correctly?
We got plenty of energy. We get tight during peaks, and you can't just wave a magic wand and make the peaks go away, because peaks are there for a reason, right? There's weather-driven peaks, there's daily activity-driven peaks. You can't just change that reality, but you can create some incentives to start shaving that reality. And one of the things, we'll have a paper coming out pretty shortly about this, kind of what the opportunity space is for behind the meter resources, but also the need for retail rate reform. Most retail rates are woefully under incentivizing shifting to peak demand. And I think we could do a lot more in that area.
And you don't see batteries being able to handle
so batteries can do quite a bit, actually, and with the way that retail rates are designed, there are some benefits to doing behind the meter batteries, because the batteries can cut peaks more effectively than they can serve peaks in the wholesale markets, or be accredited for peaks in the wholesale markets. But that actually, I would still argue, is a flawed retail rate design. But right now, if you think about on peak versus off peak rates, or versus time, like around the clock rates, if you look at demand charges and who has demand charges and who doesn't, and how they're applied and how they're calculated, there's a lot of room to make that better aligned to cutting peaks when system resources run short.
Interesting.
I would agree with Ken that you've said it a couple times, Ken, and I don't think we should go away from it. Our grid in the United States hasn't had any meaningful upgrades since the 1970s. What's underhyped is grid security, because you could get a denial of service attack and we're done, and we have no real meaningful defenses. And then the overhyped side, I agree with Ken. Anything that has a color before the energy source, overhyped. Green, turquoise, pink, whatever. That's so
that's a good way to put it.
And nobody talked about full-scale nuclear. I mean, Fahad, you guys work for a French company. I don't remember the exact statistic, but I believe it's more than 2/3 of France's electricity is still generated by nuclear. And now you have other countries, China, India, have developed fast breeder technology. So those guys don't have the same hangups with utilizing that form of electricity. So I think, again, going back to the theme we said at the beginning, you cannot just make this a US-centric discussion. You've got to look at the total mix for the world's power generation if you're going to be an investor or an operator of facilities around the world. And to Brent's point, where you put your computers, if you're storing cat videos, you don't need to be right across from Manhattan. But if you're doing heavy quant calculations, you need to be right there.
Excellent. Okay, just one final question, I think. In terms of folks responsible for actually the energy management and optimization side of your third-party assets that are in operations, what are the specific market services? And I'm referring to either ancillary services, basis risk management, or real-time optimization are currently offering the highest value for you generators and large consumers in 2026? Is there a particular space where it's particularly helpful to have that service provided to you? Anybody?
I can start. So a lot of those services are in-house for us. So we take those values for granted, I guess, John. I would say, just in general, some of these schedulers, market participants, market forecasting, short-term, they offer, I think, the most value in generally. O&M and asset management and all that, a lot of that has been, given the sheer scale of what solar has been built out in the US, I think that aspect of it has been very standardized across different areas and with different companies. But I think from just a pure revenue perspective, some of these companies that provide some of these solutions around what to select day ahead, if you're going to go real time, how you should bid, especially around batteries, that I think that is one of the most critical uses that I see from an outside.
Our company is one of the ones that does that, particularly for storage, because storage is complicated with state of charge limitations. You have to be really strategic about how you participate in markets. I'll say ancillary services, any market where you've built a bunch of storage, the ancillary service value is pretty low. But then there becomes a pretty differentiated value in how well you can optimize your asset around the ancillary services. But most of the value is energy and capacity, but there's a big difference in performance between sophisticated market participants and less sophisticated market participants. And you can see that in the SCED data in ERCOT. You can actually see a huge range in value for how different assets are optimized.
No, that's good to know. Okay, guys, I think we're coming to a close here on a forum discussion. I want to thank our panelists, Bobby Majumdar, Ken Malik, Brent Nelson, and Fahad Siddiqui, for taking your time, guys. I respect it. It's extremely valuable time that you offered up for us, and I want to share with you my real appreciation for the time you dedicated to this. For the audience, what's clear is that energy is no longer just a commodity. It's a strategic constraint shaping investment, development, and economic growth across all sectors of the U.S. economy. We hope that this discussion provided a clearer view of how the market is evolving and where the opportunities lie ahead. So thank you very much for joining us. Have yourself a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.